Gangsta Granny by David Walliams. Chapter 13. A Lifetime of Crime. Hours passed in what seemed like minutes, as Granny told her grandson how she had stolen every one of the dazzling items spread out on the living room floor. The huge tiara had belonged to the wife of the President of the United States of America, the First Lady. Granny told Ben how, over 50 years earlier, she had sailed all the way to America on a cruise liner to steal it from the White House in Washington, and that whilst sailing back home, she had robbed every rich lady on the ship of her jewels. How she was caught red-handed by the captain of the ship and escaped by diving overboard and swimming the last few miles of the Atlantic Ocean back to England, with all of the jewellery hidden in her knickers. Granny told Ben that the sparkling emerald earrings that had been in her little bungalow for decades were worth over £1 million each. They had once belonged to the wife of an enormously wealthy Indian Maharaja, a Maharani. The old lady recounted how she had enlisted the help of a herd of elephants to steal them. She had coaxed the elephants to stand on top of each other to form a giant ladder, so she could scale the wall of the fort in India where the earrings were kept in the royal bedchamber. The most amazing tale of all was of how she had stole the enormous deep blue diamond and sapphire brooch that sat sparkling on her warm living room carpet. She told Ben that it had once belonged to the last Empress of Russia, who ruled with her husband the Tsar before the Communist Revolution in 1917. It had for many years been under bulletproof glass at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, by a platoon of fearsome Russian soldiers. This theft had required the most elaborate plan of all. Granny had hidden in an ancient suit of armour in the museum, which dated back hundreds of years to the time of Catherine the Great. Each time the soldiers looked the other way, she would edge forward in the metal suit a few millimetres until she got close enough to the brooch. It took her a week. "What, like Granny's footsteps?" asked Ben. "Exactly, young man," she replied. "Then I smashed the glass with the silver axe I was holding and grabbed the brooch." "How did you escape, Granny?" "That's a good question. Now, how did I escape?" Granny looked flummoxed. "Sorry, it's my age, boy. I forget things." Ben smiled supportively. "That's okay, Granny." Soon the old lady's memory seemed to come back into focus. "Oh yes, I remember," she continued. "I ran outside into the courtyard of the museum, leapt into the barrel of a huge cannon, and then fired myself to safety." Ben pictured this for a moment. His granny, in deepest, darkest Russia, flying through the air in an ancient suit of armour. It was hard to believe, but how else could this little old lady come to have such an astonishing collection of priceless gems? Ben loved Granny's daring tales. At home, Ben had never had stories read or told to him. His parents always just switched on the television and slumped down on the sofa when they got home from work. Hearing the old lady talk was so exciting. Ben wished he could move in with her. He could listen to Granny all day. "There can't be a jewel in the world you haven't stolen," said Ben. "Oh yes, there is, young man." "Hang on, what's that?" "What's what?" said Ben. Granny was pointing behind Ben's head, an expression of horror on her face. It's... "What?" said Ben, not daring to turn round and see what she was pointing at. A shiver ran down his spine. "Whatever you do," said Granny, "don't turn round." Chapter 14. Nosy Neighbour. Ben couldn't help himself, and his eyes darted towards the window. For a brief moment he saw a dark figure wearing a strange hat peer through the dirty glass, and then quickly disappear out of view. "There was a man peering in at the window," said Ben breathlessly. I know, said Granny. I told you not to look. Shall I go out and see who it was? Said Ben, trying to hide the fact that he was more than a little frightened. Really, he wanted Granny to go out and see who it was. I bet it was my nosy neighbour, Mr. Parker. He lives at number 7. He always wears a pork pie hat, and he keeps spying on me. Why? Asked Ben. Granny shrugged. I don't know. I imagine he has a rather cold head or something. What? Said Ben. Oh, no, not his hat. I mean, why does he keep spying on you? He's a retired major, and now he runs the Neighbourhood Watch scheme in Grey Close. What's Neighbourhood Watch? Asked Ben. It's a group of local people who keep an eye out for burglars. But Mr. Parker just uses it as an excuse to spy on everyone, the nosy old git. I often come back from the supermarket with my bag of cabbages and see he's hiding behind his net curtains, spying on me with a pair of binoculars. Is he suspicious about you? Said Ben, more than a little panicked. He didn't want to be thrown in jail for aiding and abetting a criminal. He didn't really know what abetting meant, actually, but he knew it was a crime, and he knew he was too young for prison. He's suspicious about everyone. We have to keep an eye out for him, young lad. The man is a menace. Ben went over to the window and peered out. He couldn't see anyone. Bring! Ben's heart missed a beat. It was only the doorbell, but if they let Mr. Parker inside, he would see all the evidence the police would need to send Ben and his granny straight to prison. Don't answer it, said Ben as he ran to the middle of the room and started stuffing all the jewels back in the tin as quickly as he could. What do you mean, don't answer it? He knows I'm at home. He just saw us through the window. You answer the door and I will hide the jewels. Me? Yes, you. Hurry. Bring! This ring was more insistent. Mr. Parker had left his finger on the buzzer for even longer. Ben took a deep breath and walked calmly through the hall to the front door. He opened it. Outside stood a man in a very silly hat. Don't believe me? This is how silly his hat was. Yes, said Ben in a squeaky high voice. Can I help you? Mr. Parker put his foot inside the bungalow so the front door couldn't be closed on him. Who are you? He barked nasally. He had a very big nose, which made him seem even nosier than he was, and he already seemed extremely nosy. Because he had a big nose, he also had a very nasal voice, which made everything he said, however serious, seem a little bit absurd. But his eyes shone red like a demon. I am Granny's friend, spluttered Ben. Why did I say that, he thought. In truth, he was in a terrible panic, and his tongue was running away with him. Friend, snarled Mr. Parker, pushing open the front door. He was stronger than Ben, and soon forced his way inside. I mean grandson, Mr. Parker, sir, said Ben, retreating back towards the living room. Why are you lying to me? He said, taking several paces forward as Ben took several paces back. It was as if they were dancing the tango. I am not lying, cried Ben. They reached the living room door. You can't go in there, yelled Ben, thinking of the jewels still scattered all over the carpet. Why not? Because Granny is doing her naked yoga. Ben needed a dramatic excuse to stop Mr. Parker barging through the door and seeing the jewels. He was pretty sure he had hit the jackpot as Mr. Parker paused and furrowed his brow. Sadly, the nosy neighbour was not convinced. Naked yoga? A likely story. I need to talk to your grandmother right away. Now get her out of my way, you nasty little worm of a boy, he said, as he shoved the boy aside and opened the living room door. Granny must have heard Ben through the door, because when Mr. Parker burst into the room, she was standing in her bra and knickers, in a tree pose. Mr. Parker, do you mind? Said Granny in mock horror that he had seen her in a state of undress. Mr. Parker's eyes spun round the room. He didn't know where to look, so he fixed his glare now on the bare carpet. "Excuse me, madam, but I need to ask you, where are those jewels I saw a moment ago?" Ben spied the silver Jubilee biscuit tin poking out from behind the sofa. Surreptitiously, he edged it out of view with his foot. "What jewels, Mr. Parker? Have you been spying on me again?" demanded Granny, still in her underwear. "Well, he spluttered. "I had good reason. I was suspicious when I saw a young gentleman enter your property. I thought he might be a burglar. I let him in through the front door. He might have been a very charming burglar. He might have weaseled his way into your confidence." "He's my grandson. He stays every Friday night." "Ah!" said Mr. Parker triumphantly. "But it's not Friday night, so you can see why my suspicions were raised. And as head of Grey Close's neighbourhood watch, I must report anything suspicious I see to the police." "I've got a good mind to report you to the police, Mr. Parker," said Ben. Granny looked at him curiously. "Whatever for?" said the man, his eyes narrowed. They were now so red it was like there was a fire in his brain. "For spying on old ladies in their underwear," said Ben triumphantly. Granny winked at Ben. "She was fully clothed when I looked through the window," protested Mr. Parker. "That's what they all say," said Granny. "Now get out of my house before you are arrested for being a peeping Tom." "You've not heard the last of me. Good day," said Mr. Parker. With that, he spun on his heels and left the room. Granny and Ben heard the front door slam behind him, and they ran over to the window and watched him scuttle back to his bungalow. "I think we frightened him off," said Ben. But he'll be back," said Granny. "We have to be very careful." "Yes," said Ben, more than a little alarmed. "We'd better hide this tin somewhere else." Granny thought for a moment. "Yes, I'll put it under the floorboards." "Okay," said Ben, "but first—" "Yes, Ben?" "You might want to get dressed. And tomorrow I'll read chapter 15.